Hello, everyone. Welcome to another inspirational episode of Voices for Tibet. I'm your host, Karma Tensam. I'm with the Tibetan Children's Education Foundation. On this new video series, we are trying to capture the voices of people who love Tibet, love Tibetan culture, even love Tibetan children. At this point of time, I feel that it is really very important for us to have as many voices support Tibet. I know that we have a fantastically vibrant, small Tibetan social networking system that we all love and that we all catch every day. But even outside the social bubble of the Tibetans in our Tibetan language, I think it's really important for us to hear voices that support us in English, in French, in the other Western languages, so that we have the support of the international community also. And so today for the Voices for Tibet, I'm so privileged to have another young Tibet lover and supporter. She and her family have been great supporters of Tibet over many years. Thank you so much, Aimee Ryan, for being on this program. Thank you and your family for many years of love and support to Tibet. And now, thank you also for being a TCF sponsor and this Voice for Tibet. Aimee, can I begin this by requesting you to introduce yourself to the Voices for Tibet audience?
Of course. Hi, Tashi Delek, both to you, Karma, and anybody who watches in the future. It's really, really sweet to get to be here. What an honor to be invited. Even just to spend an hour reflecting on the gifts that the Tibetan people and the Tibet culture have given, not just to my life, but to the world. I feel like what a rich and incredible culture that you guys are continuing to bring, and through so much hardship. So anyways, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
It's a real honor to get to be here with you. Yes, myself, it's always funny to introduce myself. Which parts to highlight. I grew up in Montana, as you know well,
right.
And so grateful to have shared a place that has touched both of our lives. I grew up at a place called the Feathered Pipe Ranch, which is really connected with the Tibetan Children's Education Foundation. And that really launched me, both my upbringing at the ranch and being exposed to different cultures at a young age, to want to see what I could do with particularly with communications and language, and how I could make a difference in the world in that way. And so I'm a facilitator and a mediator, and I work with folks to try to transform conflict. And so I work mostly with groups, and right now I work in an organization in California called Ag Innovations, and we work mostly with both the agricultural industry and folks who rely on natural resources here in California, and issues around water and food and agricultural viability, fire issues. So lots of really important issues here in California. That's mostly where I'm focusing my efforts these days.
Awesome, Aimee, and thank you for that. See, I love that you are a communicator. We are going to get to that question soon. But before that, Aimee, I wanted to ask you, if you think back, I know we both talked about the feather pipe, but
Sure.
When do you think you first started to have some awareness or connection to Tibet, or even to the Tibetan culture?
Yeah, I love that question. Just because it's fun to think back of like, yeah, how long has this been in my awareness and been sort of impacting me in subconscious ways? Having grown up at the Feathered Pipe Ranch, it's sort of like the water I'm swimming in. I've known, of course, for many, many years of the Tibetan people, and both the beauty and the gifts, and also the incredible struggle. But I think it really became something that I could point to and knew of it when I went to northern India and Nepal with my family and many at the Feathered Pipe Ranch. I think when I was 7. And just meeting Tibetans who are in exile and being influenced by the Tibetan culture in different places, both, of course, in India and Nepal, and each has their own culture, but really experiencing the culture of the Tibetan people there. And then just, this is silly, but all the Tibetan rugs that actually have been found in and around the ranch, and that you guys have gifted to my family over the years. It's sort of like been part of the decor of so much of our lives.
Right.
And that's been really sweet. And I'd say also, of course, having you and your family come to Montana and
Right.
be a part of the ranch, that's, I think, and seeing TCEF really grow up as this powerful organization. I think these are moments, I think probably when I was in elementary or middle school, really getting an education through my experience with you and your family about
Right.
what it means to be, or even just a little taste of a glimpse in what it means to be a Tibetan in exile, and again, the beauty of the culture that you carry.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, Aimee, I'm so glad that today I have this opportunity to talk to a younger voice for Tibet. As you know, many of my acquaintances and best friends in the TCF circle have been a little bit elderly persons. I wanted to really ask this question to a younger person because it's about rebranding the Tibet image in today's world. And let me try and put this in perspective.
Please.
A couple of weeks ago, I interviewed an iconic Tibetan singer, performer called Techung. In a Tibetan world, he's really big. And in our conversation, he talked about performing in the 80s for something called the Tibetan Freedom Concerts. And I remember them, the Beastie Boys and the Tibetan Freedom Concert. And he was telling me that those concerts, they used to be attended by 50, 60. The largest one of them, I believe, was even attended by over 100,000 people. Can you just imagine that? And then even when I came into the country like a couple of decades ago, I remember there used to be all these bumper stickers which said Free Tibet or Save Tibet. So you know where I'm getting to. I somehow sense that we are not so much in the global consciousness as a few decades ago. And I wanted to ask a younger brain, a brilliant younger brain, about how we Tibetans can sort of rebrand ourselves. How can we get back into the global consciousness? What can we do so that, we brand ourselves, bring ourselves to the forefront of the international community, keep Tibet and the causes of Tibet in people's consciousness? Because even though it's been many years that the dramatic episodes of His Holiness the Dalai Lama fleeing into exile, the fact still remains that the issue of Tibet persists. There is a problem. We are a people in exile. There are Tibetans in Tibet who are unhappy under Chinese occupation. So how can we rebrand ourselves, Aimee?
Powerful question. I love being in conversation and in dialogue with you. I certainly, gosh, if I had the answer, I would not keep it to myself this long. But I really appreciate, I think first, like the determination and the unwavering dedication that I experienced in that question. And that's something that in reflecting on the sort of the plight of the Tibetan people, I think of like this unwavering dedication, like that there's just like, it's, much of the world has turned to a thousand other crises that are happening. And yet I know that yourself and so many others continue day in and day out to fight, mostly the nonviolent fight of like, what does it mean for us to regain and to regain our statehood and our sort of place within and like our home and our culture and have it be thriving. So I guess I just first want to even reflect that back of like, that's one of the qualities that I see the Tibetan people exuding, is just like this resilience, a true resilience. And in a time, it's interesting, in a time where, a lot of attention is, at least in this country, is being focused on healing and healing past wounds, whether it's with African Americans or Indigenous folks or other communities that have been really dehumanized and systemically sort of pushed to the margins for decades, if not centuries. I think of one of the things that we have to learn from these communities, and including the Tibetan people, is resilience. And that's one of the things that's continually coming up, is that the rest of the world, particularly the West, I'd say, and places that have been sort of colonized by the West, the Western mind, the Western way of doing things, we have a lot to learn about resilience, especially when we look to the planet and the ways in which, like we've become so out of balance with our lifestyles and what it means to live on this planet in a good way. And so I think one of the things, like, and why I'm reflecting on this, I'm just sort of thinking out loud. Again, I don't have like the answers, but what are the qualities of the Tibetan people that we all have so much to learn from? And not because like the Tibetan people are, quote, like victims and need to be saved, but because like, oh my God, we have so much to learn from you, and so much to like, to be shoulder to shoulder and brothers and sisters in this human experience. And so there's something about, I'm thinking of really successful movements. And when you talk about rebranding,
Yes.
I'm thinking about like really successful, but whether civil rights or human rights movements.
Right.
And of course, there's the Black Lives Matter movement, which has just exploded internationally. Absolutely. And I think a lot of movements, whether it's around a certain race or background or even broader, can learn from what Black Lives Matter has done.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I see, that there's a few things that come to mind, and then I'd love to pause and just curious what lands for you, what makes sense or what doesn't, because I like, as an outsider, I can only sort of throw ideas and then really want to see what lands for you guys. Storytelling and humanity is really centered in at least as from this perspective, from where I'm sitting, in the Black Lives Matter movement. Like there's a lot of storytelling. There's a lot of both uplifting what's not working and motivating people into action based on anger and despair, but also that being paired with positive hope and altruism, and bringing people into the movement to show, the brilliance and how we're all made richer by ensuring that everybody has equal rights and has, so there's equity in the system. And so I think that the other piece in reflecting on what Black Lives Matter has been up to is a lot of local organizing. I think they start small and they're local, and they have leaders within the Black Lives movement that are really about like stoking local support. That the campaign has grown as strong as it has because it was so foundational. And so I guess, part of what I think about, again, just to turn it around, is like what you're up to, and like the way in which, like, you've even just like in Montana, I think that, gosh, Montana's made so much richer, and there's such a more of an understanding of the Tibetan people and the struggle there because you're here, because you are in Montana. And so I'm curious about ways that the Tibetan movement can stoke sort of localized awareness and campaigns around both, of course, in that part of the world, but even here in the West. I'm curious, do you see that happening, or does that resonate based on your experience?
It does, Aimee, and I think you're right about that, because when I came into America, when I came to Montana, there were two things. Number one, I was surprised by how little people actually knew about Tibet.
Yeah.
And that for me was surprising. Just because Tibet was the center of my universe, I somehow sort of assumed that folks knew about Tibet. But at many places, I found that was not true. And the second part is this: where people did know about Tibet, the thing which really encouraged me was that they invariably had great love and empathy.
Yes.
So that goes back to the point of basically trying to raise awareness, that, giving people the information and the knowledge. That's a great start, because my own experience of traveling around the country and trying to do presentations on Tibet at places like Wyoming or Montana or North Dakota, places where they don't get a lot of Tibetan traffic. My sense is this, that supporting Tibet, the beginning is by knowing and giving information about Tibet.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that part. And the second part is also, I'm passionate about sharing Tibetan culture, because I always believe that it is truly wonderful, it's worth sharing. But one reason to elevate Tibetan culture is because if folks realize that this is a unique and wonderful culture, maybe that's another avenue into getting more support for Tibet.
Yeah.
So, the points which you raised really resonate with me. I sort of keep nodding and saying, Aimee's got a good point there.
Yeah. And, I want to uplift like what a leader you are in the Tibetan, at least, of course, in the Montana community. But from what I know, a leader in many circles within the Tibetans in exile and probably beyond, in ways that I don't even know. And I think that there's something really there about building off of and supporting other leaders such as yourself, and like identifying, again, I think to the Black Lives Matter movement and what little I know of why it's a success. And I've heard that there's something about the leadership within that movement that people call like leaderful, that they're true leaders, that they're people, again, such as yourself, who are genuinely wanting to empower others, inspire others, include everyone, that everybody has a place in this movement. Right. And they support, the leadership of the global movement has done, I think, a really good job of empowering local leaders to stoke and to give them like something just like this, what you're doing, like an idea of doing videos and putting out in social media and creating content that people can connect with.
Yes.
And what little idea, what Tibetan person might watch one of these and be like, ooh, what I want to do, it's not quite that, but it's this. And to have people sort of riff on each other and support local leaders. And so I'd be curious what networks of Tibetan leadership, not on like an official, government level, but just sort of like the people to people, who are those natural born leaders that you can help to identify and stoke, and be curious to include them. And I'm sure that they're already out there, of course, doing it, just how to connect them and like uplift them even more.
Right. And Aimee, you have a really good point there. When I introduced the program, I was talking about the Tibetan social media. Really interesting. Our Facebook and WhatsApp, stuff like that. There's a small, but it's a really vibrant Tibetan community in exile and in diaspora, and people are active. My own family, like my daughters, everybody, they followed actively, and all that is good and wonderful. It connects us, it enriches our life, but there's not really a lot of that in English or in other Western languages. And in doing this Voices for Tibet program that we started this year, my hope is to include a lot of the younger Tibetan voices who are educated, who are articulate, who are passionate about their culture and the cause. If they also start sharing their voices with their own circle of friends, I think we have an opportunity to make an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something about, really trusting that within each struggle, and whether it's each person or a couple or a community or a whole nation, that like within the struggle is also the answer. And so there's like the creativity, the resilience, the perseverance, like the depth. I think of the Tibetan people as some of like the kindest, like not just nice, but like deeply kind, grounded, loving humans, that like within those qualities, like the answers are there, that it won't come from outside. I think like the answers will come from within the brilliance of the community. And hearing you saying like, talking to all these incredible young people, it's like they have the answers, they know.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Aimee, I'm again going to ask you another relatively difficult question, but I'm excited to ask you about it, because I know that you have this fantastic background in collaborative communication. I did a little bit of study on yourself, and I know that you are passionate about it and that you work to create spaces for both slash and, that is, you are trying to create spaces that have the capacity to hold complexity, where people from different backgrounds, interests, and partisan views, even political divides, can come together and try and resolve conflicts and strengthen collaboration. And for me, that is fascinating, because we have a really difficult question to solve, and that is starting a dialogue with the leadership of the Chinese. I know as a Tibetan, we've been trying to do this for years together, because how do you solve the question of Tibet? It has to start by having a dialogue. But how do we bring about this dialogue between the Chinese leadership and the Tibetans? I know that we have been struggling, but as someone in the field of communication, how do you think we can even make a beginning to starting a conversation with the Chinese leadership?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good question.
And I know it's a difficult question, but it's also such a vital question for Tibetans. You know, we are really searching for answers here.
Yeah. Oh, I feel, teary, just because it's, again, like there's that quality of like such a deep dedication to finding a way through, like never giving up. Like we still want to talk to you, you Chinese leadership, like please give us a chance. It's such a rich conversation. I'd love to continue it over. Hopefully we'll get to see each other this summer and, over a cup of chai. And some of the things that come to mind are similar, but different from what I just shared a moment ago. But I think about other successful, and even like we could unpack what I mean by successful movements, but movements that are able to influence change and gain traction, and also gain visibility, as you've been naming. And one of the things I continue to see in those movements is local organizing. And what comes to mind in relation to this question that you're asking is, what are the ways in which, like even before we get to Chinese leadership, so I'm always curious of how we get into seats of power and how we can influence decision makers. So I'm not going to skirt around that, but sort of before that, my question is what kinds of dialogues are being hosted that include everyday the Chinese, would it be Han Chinese people? Yeah, the Han Chinese people and Tibetans. And what are ways in which there can be, this is just, I'm throwing pasta against the wall. I'm just curious that there can be, similar to in this country, there's a big movement to bring together Democrats and Republicans. And there are lots of different venues that people trying to bring them together, just to, not even to fix the issue, but just to start a dialogue, to see what happens, not to convince each other of anything, but just to listen deeply. And to me, that's the power, I feel teary. That's the power of the human spirit, is we can shift when we hear somebody else's story. And it's not about convincing somebody else or showing them the facts or presenting more data. It's about human beings, and our hearts have this incredible ability when we listen deeply to another person. We're changed. We just aren't, it just is how it happens. And of course people can guard their hearts, and shift can take a long time. So I'm not trying to say that there's a magic bullet, but I see again and again what often looks like miracles and magic happen when people are deeply listened to. And that's at the core of my work and sort of my worldview and my theory of change, is that when we witness, and it's at the core of Tibetan practices and Buddhist practices around meditation, when we witness with an open heart and that like loving compassion, we're changed. And so I offer that of like, how do we bring that quality to dialogues, and bringing local community people, local Han people and local Tibetan people living in Tibet to start having dialogues, just focus on like, what can we learn from each other? How can we create a world that really works for everybody if we're going to share this land together? And even organizing others within the borders of China who share a similar struggle. I think of the Uyghur people,
Oh,
that it's not just, I think that's one of the things, again, just to think of other movements that have been so successful. For example, to not just have it be about, of course, it's about the Tibetan people. And also, how do you like join shoulders with others who are in a similar struggle with you, that it becomes not just about the freedom of Tibetan people, but how do we ask together for a fundamental reordering of society where everyone living within China and those in exile are free from systemic dehumanization? How do we band together and strengthen our numbers to say, like, it's not just for me, like, I want everybody in this country, in China, to have that freedom, and who's in exile to welcome to come home. And so that, like, there's like, again, that resilience and diversity of the story. So I'm curious if any of that resonates for you, or what comes up hearing that.
absolutely. Yeah, Aimee, see, I'm so glad that I'm having this conversation. I knew I would get something rich and concrete from you, and it's really true. I remember going back to the days when I had that good fortune to win that Fulbright scholarship at Harvard, and we had this small community of Tibetan students trying to have a dialogue with ethnic Han Chinese students also at the university. And it was really interesting. We, in my conversations, it was so interesting, Aimee, there were Chinese students who were totally convinced of the Chinese worldview, that the Chinese occupation was a good thing, that they liberated the feudalism and the serfdom of the Tibetans. So there was that view. We came across that view, but in the middle of that, there was a brilliant business school graduate, Mei Zhang, who totally saw the Tibetan point of view. So beautiful. When you talk about, of course, we are always going to hope for that big dialogue between the Tibetan leadership and the Chinese leadership. But I agree with you, other voices, other conversations around the community also need to happen. So I agree with what you said, Aimee. Thank you for those inputs. I really appreciate those inputs.
Yeah. And I would just say too, hearing that example, of this woman in the business school, it's like those people, we never know where those people are going to end up and who becomes your ambassador from the inside. Like what Han Chinese person is going to be shifted, and maybe a young person that grows up and becomes
a Politburo member,
Exactly. The mayor or the equivalent, or, the city councilman, or whatever is the equivalent in China.
Really?
And so where are, like, how do we, and that's where, again, the resilience and the determination and perseverance of the Tibetan people, I think, is going to come in handy, because there's a patience, it's not like, how do we get everyone in the room and solve it tomorrow? Like, God, I wish, like, wouldn't that be like, get the leaders in? And in the meantime, while we strategize around that, how do we build and sort of shape the narrative from the ground up, so that there's been tens and then dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of Han Chinese people who have been, their heart has been opened, and they now have a whole different experience, and they become ambassadors, and they want to say to their leadership, whoa, I'm not okay with this. It's not the Tibetans saying it, it's other people saying, like, this is not okay. I don't want to live in a country that treats people like this.
Yes.
Because it impacts me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And at a personal level, even at a personal level, I totally agree with what you say. I think that in a journey towards a dialogue with the Chinese, it actually boils down to a question of changing hearts. Trying to reach a level where, the other people also, we give them a chance to view the Tibetan side of things also. And I think a dialogue can happen at that point of time.
Yeah. And can I offer one more thing?
Yes, absolutely.
And the curiosity is often for me is how can, like, I really believe that that humans are creative enough to come up with strategies that work for everyone. So what's the fear? I genuinely don't know, but what's the fear of the Tibetan the Chinese leadership,
right,
of giving freedom and the right to be, full citizens within, like, what's the concern, and how do we, I don't know this, but, like, what's the how do we address that? How do we hold that alongside the absolute need in order for the Tibetan people to be able to self-express and have religious freedoms and all, basic humanitarian rights? How do we make sure in this country we see a big to-do around, for example, police funding?
Mhm.
And so the question being like, how do we make sure that communities are safe, if that's really what the question is, while also making sure that people who are either in a Black body or a brown body are also, protected, and that there's enough funding to go around to make sure that the system is really working. And so we want all the needs to be met still. We're just looking for new strategies. And so I'm always curious and this might become through dialogues if we ever get to be in the room with folks holding sort of the Han Chinese perspective of what's the fear and what would you need? What do you need in order to make the shift, in order to trust that
Aimee,
there's
that's
enough?
at a personal level also, that's been part of my frustration. And I know that other Tibetans also share the frustration is we can't quite understand the lack of self-confidence which the Chinese have in themselves. Like if today we look upon the Chinese as a nation, they are a superpower. I mean, I watched the 2008 Beijing Olympics and I was blown away just to see, how vibrant and big China is. And then not to have that confidence to talk with the man of peace like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it's something that I can't understand.
Confusing.
Very confusing. But having said that, even though it might be confusing, I guess we have no other alternative except to keep persevering, except to keep trying to reach out. And like you said, resilience has got to be our strength.
Yes, it's one of your many. It's so inspiring. And I think, again, continuing to ask the questions and just to stay curious and to do, I think there's something so beautiful in, like mixing like hope with grief, like that, like there's that grief, and to like allow it to like open hearts, and then like to stay in that resilience and to keep moving forward. So I'm so grateful to get to just be in the question with you, and continuing to ask. So
okay, Aimee. Aimee, thank you so much for being this voice for Tibet. I'm so grateful for your perspectives. Always grateful for your support. Always a privilege to talk to a Tibetan supporter. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karma. Such a pleasure.